Okay, well, welcome, guys. This is our first reaction video in a long time. I've actually been thinking about making more reaction type videos. And when this popped up on my feed this morning, I was not actually that surprised because I saw this Wickens video a while ago. And my goal is to be very charitable with the way that I come across in my interactions with people, right? Because I think at the end of the day, the more that we're able to relate to each other and find common ground, I think is going to be better overall for the hobby, especially content creators. I know it's fun to see people kind of bash each other and go at it, right? And I'm tempted to do that sometimes myself, but at the end of the day, I just personally am convicted that that's not what's best for myself. That's not what's best for the other person. That's not what's best for the hobby as a whole. So Jessica, or sorry, is her name is not Jessica. I'm sorry. I get her confused with Jessica's animal friends because these guys are close with each other, which we actually did an interview with Jessica's animal friends in the past. I'll leave a link to that here. She was very charitable because I know that it takes every fiber in her being not to just go off on a breeder, because the way that breeders do things is very different than the way that keepers tend to do things. And so if you're looking at the hierarchy of pet keeping, so to speak, right? There's like the ultra pet keepers that say like you need UVB, you need a giant space for your animals, or you need to sanitize like everything in the cage before it goes in. And then right below that is like semi-bioactive people, which are kind of supportive towards some of that. And then I would say below that would be like more ethical breeders that try to pursue like larger environments for the animals, even though they may be keeping them in tubs. They try to put textures and enrichments in the tubs. And somebody like that might be like Bubba's Geckos or like Snake Discovery. And then below that is your average reptile breeder, which is okay with just like a minimalistic setup. It's easy to keep things clean and hygienic and all that kind of stuff. And these are the main people that make content on YouTube and on social media as far as the breeding side of things goes. And so some of those people might be like even the upper echelons of what breeders look up to and admire, like Justin Kabelka, Miguel Garcia. There's absolutely nothing inherently wrong with the way that those guys are keeping their animals, but it is not done in a route to pursue enrichment. It's done in a route to pursue hygiene and efficiency, healthy animals, quality animals. So all of that is good, but there's a really big push right now in the reptile hobby with so much social media being out there for better care for your animals. And then real quick, let me also say beneath the average keeper is more of like the old school mentality. I'm not going to name names for the old school mentality because we're not trying to necessarily put any one person on blast. And it doesn't mean that the animals are bad or unhealthy. It just means that they're given way less enrichment for more production and efficiency. And so an example of that might be the cage size for animals, so that a larger animal might be in a smaller cage, or a group of animals might be in a cage for efficiency, specifically for breeding. And again, even at this level, it does not mean that the animals are unhealthy or abused. They're just kept in very low enrichment, less stimulating environments. And this is often because there is a high frequency of these animals moving. So these animals are in these conditions for short periods of time. Now, the one exception to that is if the breeders that are there in the facility for life are kept in those conditions, right? Because it's one thing if an animal is kept in lower enriching standards for just a couple weeks or a couple months, but it's another thing if that animal is kept in those standards for life because it is a breeder. And I know for a fact that these breeders, they don't want their animals to not have enrichment. It's just that for the efficiency of the business operation and also the frequency upon which these animals move out of their operation, it's a justifiable cause in their mind. And then beneath that would be wholesaler, like giant wholesalers and importers. And there's a reason why you don't see the facilities of giant wholesalers and importers. It would probably be very similar to us seeing the facilities of like where our meat and poultry comes from, right? There's a saying, you don't want to see how the sausage is made. And to a certain degree, especially under those conditions, that's true. I mean, when you're getting in tens of thousands of animals imported and you're also producing tens of thousands of animals a year, what that looks like behind the scenes would probably be a little bit more on the shocking scale for people. Now, the question is, does it have to look that way? And I will not afford an answer to that right now. I will let you guys think about that. But for sure, there is a push right now on that hierarchy around the average breeder scale. So we're talking about the Justin Cabelkas, the Miguel Garcias, the Gecko Boas, the Gecko Etceteras, the Geeky Gecko Creations. There's a push right now for this style of breeding to move up. And that is a challenge that we're either going to meet or not meet. You know, can we give our animals more space if it means less profits? Now, this is going to be a little different for a leopard gecko breeder versus a ball python breeder. For example, the top ball python breeders are bringing in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year. And then the top leopard gecko breeders are only bringing in tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 a year, you know, and you also have to look at the consistency of that. So even if a breeder hits 100,000 this year, there's no guarantee they're going to hit 100,000 next year, right? And so you have to look at the numbers and see what makes sense as far as change goes and improvement, right? Because we could all change, we can all improve. And I think in a way that is what, sorry, I forget her name here. Her name is Leopard Gecko and no one's ever seen her face. Look at that thumbnail. I thought that was such a good thumbnail because sometimes in her videos, she doesn't even put her body at all. Like, look, just her hands, just her shirt, maybe her feet sometimes. No, just kidding. You don't ever see this lady, and much respect for this lady. I actually asked Jessica from Jessica's Animal Friends, because I know they're friends. I was like, can you get me an interview with this lady? I would love to interview this lady. And I'm so sorry that I am not knowing her name right now. I'm sure it's here somewhere. Oh, look at that. Why I don't show my face. So anyway, let's take a look into this video and see what the big deal was. I don't know if you guys saw this video, but when I saw it, in my head, I was like, there's going to be a chance that there's going to be some pushback on this video. And there was a little pushback on this video. And I haven't talked to Wicken. Is that his first name? I'm so sorry, Wicken, if that's not your first name. Because I do admire and respect this guy for his grind on YouTube over the last couple years. I've been a big fan. So here's the thing with Wicken, and if he sees this, you know, I'm not saying he's gonna see this because who am I, right? But if he sees this, if you see this, Wicken, what I really like to watch is breeder content, and he's been more of as, oh my gosh, I need to look up her name now. I need to look up her name because I can't just refer to her as Jessica because her name is not Jessica. So let's go to one of her links right here. Let's go to her Instagram. And what is your name? Lovely gecko content creator. Rebecca. Thank you. I'm so sorry, Rebecca. Okay, let's go back. So, and that's one of the things that Rebecca was kind of hinting at in this video is, hey, as a content creator, we have a lot of eyeballs on us. And even if we have our preferences, is promoting our preferences what's best for the animals and the hobby moving forward? You know, and this is something that I'm thinking a lot about right now as a leopard gecko and reptile content creator, but also focused breeder. I'm thinking, you know, there's ways that breeders do things that might not be the most alluring to like the average person or the average keeper that doesn't understand that the way the breeder is doing things is not hurting the animals. It's not abusive to the animals in any way. It's just neglecting them of some enrichment that the animal could be receiving. Now, again, there's justifications for that as far as like these animals are temporary. They're being bred for a cause, right? Like when your food is being produced in farms, you don't really think about like, is this cow enjoying its life? Because the cow has a purpose, and the purpose of that cow is to feed you, right? And breeders have a purpose, and the purpose of the breeder is to provide a beautiful, healthy, thriving animal for somebody. And to do that, you need to make enough, sell enough, house enough. And to do that, you need to look at the efficiency of a breeding operation. Now, this is where things are changing, is if there's a big push right now for breeders to upgrade their standards and change, is that something that we can push each other to as breeders and try to encourage each other to, so that we kind of move away from the older school mentality of like, how many animals can I cram in one operation and pump out, to, okay, maybe I don't do this full time. Maybe I don't do reptiles full time. And instead, I just give my reptiles more space and enrichment, which is going to make me less money, but it's going to be a better look, a better promotion, a better overall vibe for the hobby. And some of the people that I think are doing this really, really great right now is the Europeans. You know, we interviewed Sophie from Sophie's Geckos and also Rebecca from Dragoon Gecko, and they talk about how they actually have standards of care that have to be met for breeders over there, like have to be met. So you're talking about like a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot cage, which can house, I think they said, up to like 2 to 4 females and 1 male per season, something like that, right? So they can't actually breed in a tub type scenario. They actually have to keep animals in a cage type scenario. And I can't remember if she said that there was UVB requirements and heating requirements and stuff like that. And so the question comes down to is, if an animal can be kept in certain conditions, should it be kept in those conditions? And that's what Rebecca gets to here. And we're going to take a look. I'm going to fast forward to just some of the main points of this video.
Oh, Louie, where are you going?
Rebecca, we're going to get you the ad credit, Rebecca. We'll watch this. Just so you know, if you watch the ads for the content creators that you like, they actually make more money. So just keep that in mind. We appreciate it. So here's Wicken getting ready to announce a new setup that he is about to make for 6 leopard geckos.
Usually do these kind of videos, I feel very awkward criticizing a fellow pet tuber, but since this is about leopard geckos and a lot of people have asked me to talk about it, I figured I would. I've only just been made aware of this video by WICKENS Wicked Reptiles. Very difficult to say.
I agree. It is difficult to say. Tongue twister there for sure.
And so I haven't watched it, so we're going to watch this, like, my reaction will be live. It is a 10-minute long video. I might cut some bits through if it's not.
All right, so the first thing he talks about is substrate. Let's see what he says about that, and let's see what she says. That's what she said.
I don't want you to overthink this. This is supposed to be fun. So I'm going to use...
Okay, definitely overthink stuff. Okay, don't worry yourself, don't get anxious about stuff. But definitely when you're setting up a reptile enclosure, you don't want to go in it willy-nilly. You don't want to go, I don't really think about the substrate. So much can go wrong based on incorrect substrate or stuff being in the substrate. So definitely be mindful of this. And this is one thing I've noticed with...
So Jessica actually is right about that. Jessica, goodness gracious, Frank, get it together, man. Rebecca is actually right about that. If you were to pull substrate from your backyard or even substrate from Home Depot, even if it's organic with no fertilizer, you don't know what could be in that substrate. And actually, when I stopped buying organic topsoil from Home Depot because there would be these really large grubs in them, and I didn't know if those grubs were good or bad for my animals. You know, we had the passing of Draco this year. Draco was our giant sailfin dragon that we imported from Indonesia, and he passed away. I haven't done the official revealing video of why he passed away, but basically parasites were found eating his brain and eating his colon, and we think that more or less it was parasites that came from Indonesia, where he was from. But could it have come from the topsoil that he was being kept in because of these grubs that grow? Because he would always dig in the topsoil, and then if he sees those grubs, he's probably going to eat them. Now, if I had to guess, I would say that it was not the cause of those grubs. However, you don't know, right? So at the end of the day, if you don't bake your soil or get your soil from a place where it's already been like dried and conditioned, like eco earth, coconut fiber, I don't know if Reptisoil and stuff like processes their soil or actually bakes it before putting it in bags, but that would be something to look into. Or you could always bake the soil on your own. And so that's what Jessica is saying is, you know, I kind of took the same approach as Wickens, and to some degree still do take the same approach. Like, don't overthink it. If animals are surviving in the wild, they're going to survive in captivity. There's so many things that could actually go wrong with baking your soil and stuff like that. If you bake all the microbes and everything out of it, then the animal never truly builds up an immune system against those things. And if it comes in contact in your collection by moving from one tub to another tub as it's breeding, or just as you're bringing it around your state in general, you know, doing shows and going to kids events and all that kind of stuff, it could come in contact with those microbes anyway and then not have an immunity built up to it. So we could really argue this from both sides, but I definitely understand Rebecca's perspective on, yeah, think about it a little bit, because she's going to bring up a very good point. I don't remember if it's right now, but we're going to get to that here.
With Adam's videos, I think he likes to not overcomplicate things, which I totally get because I'm probably the opposite. And he wants to be like, hey,
This would work. I'm just saying don't drench it. If you're going to put plants in it, maybe make sure that it's caulked all on the inside. I'll get to the construction of it in a minute. Basically, now the idea is to scape it however you want. This took, in total, including setting up camera, 3.5 minutes. So what I'd like to do is put something like
You know, I will say this is, and maybe I haven't watched enough of Wickens' videos, but this video particularly, Adam, that's his name. Why am I calling him Wicken? Well, I think that's his last name. But this video particularly of Adam was a little surprising to me, because in my recollection of Adam, I remember him to be more like Jessica and Rebecca, more critically thinking about how the setup goes. And so I know this feeling, like, life is really busy, and maybe he was just really busy and just wanted to get a video done, right? And was like, I'm just going to put this together quickly. Or maybe he's starting to loosen up his perspectives on what he's comfortable with and what he's not comfortable with. And he's like, hey, look, the majority of reptile keepers out there just need something quick and easy and to the point of how to set something up. And if I don't provide that for them, they're going to do something that's worse anyway. So I might as well just put this quick video out of how to quickly and efficiently and cheaply set up a video, which I have a video of how to do that with a leopard gecko tub. I'll leave a link to that here. And yeah, that's the idea behind it. Is it's not saying that this is the standard or this is how it should be done. It's just saying that this is how you can do it, and this is acceptable for the animal to live and thrive and be okay. And it's like better than nothing, so to speak, you know, because there's not everybody, you know, I'm just going to say the raw facts here. 9 out of 10 reptile buyers right now are not in the upper echelons of pursuing what is the absolute top tier best for their animals. So what I'm saying is 90% of the hobby is okay with medium to low standards for their reptiles. Now, that can change, is changing, and most likely will change. But as of right now, it's not changed. And so the question is, what do we do in the meantime? Like, do we make videos that caters to this style of acceptability? Or do we just make about face and just stop making videos that promote any likelihood of medium to lower, like, care standards of enrichment and what we provide for the animal, and just go straight to the top? Because if that's the case, all breeders would have to stop making content until they redid their entire facility, or they would just have to not show any tubs or any of these like lower profile cages behind the scenes. They would have to like just show the animals. And then that also doesn't help people, because then people also don't have a visual representation for how should I keep this animal? Like, what is acceptable to keep this animal? So it's a lot to think about, but let's go on.
plate or brick or something that catches temperature underneath the lights. And that way during the day, they really heat up, and these animals are going to, of course, they're not going to be out during the day, usually, but at night they will be. Especially when the lights first go out, that's when they're going to come out, and that's when those rocks are still going to be warm. And of course, if you want to add something like a radiant heat panel or a ceramic heat emitter for nighttime, that
So overall, this size cage is a 4x2x2. I think that's way too tall for a leopard gecko unless you utilize branches that actually like go to the ceiling and stuff so that the animal can use the complete volume of space that is in here. And leopard geckos will do that. They will climb to the top of the cage if you give them the availability to do so. And again, I'm not like saying that he should have done this because this was his video. He could do whatever he wants with it. But what I'm saying is about cages that have too much height in volume for leopard geckos, it's just a waste of space unless you actually use branches and rocks and all kinds of different like pyramids and things so that the animal can utilize the entire volume of that space.
doesn't give off light, you can do that. So you're gonna see me putting the rocks or the bricks that I found in my yard here. And to clean them off, I did precisely nothing. Make sure that
to clean them off. Nothing to clean the rocks, the bricks, the soil. And I totally understand why Wicken is saying this, is because I've done something similar with like my sailfin dragons. Like if you were to buy cork bark and stuff that's already like processed wood, it would be like really expensive to buy the amount that you need for a vast array of like Tegus, sailfin dragons. Like we have 13 sailfin dragons, 15 Tegus, 3 adult bearded dragons, and all of these creatures use giant pieces of wood in their cage. And what I do for my wood is I strip the bark. Sometimes I don't strip the bark, but if I can, I strip the bark and let it sit out in the sun for months and months and months. And so like my neighbor cut down his tree and I took his entire tree into my backyard, and that's been the wood that I've been using for the last couple of years for all my cages. Now, Rebecca's going to bring up a very good point of something to be aware of that I was not aware of as far as a particular creature that could be living in your wood and stuff like that, that could harm reptiles. But in general, the creatures that I have out here in Arizona are scorpions, black widows, beetles. So I really have to watch out for scorpions and black widows. And that's why I strip the bark. So when I strip the bark, I can see if there's any animals on the wood. And I also sunbathe the wood because black widows and scorpions are not naturally going to be in the sunlight. They shoot for darkness, right? So if you're washing the wood and then like sunbathing it and stuff like that outside, and then double checking that before you bring it into a cage inside, you should be perfectly fine. And that's kind of what Adam is talking about.
they're not rolling around in dog turds. I mean, things like that.
Right, I'm sorry, but look, if you're watching these videos because you want a reptile and you don't have any money to spend on the decorations, don't get a reptile.
Rebecca's so charitable. She doesn't like, she's pretty cool the way that she actually comes across on YouTube. And there's a reason why she is the number one. You're hearing me say this right now. She's the number one. Oh, you can't see what I'm highlighting, but let me show you. Oops, right here. Rebecca is the number one YouTube channel for leopard geckos. And I study these things because I'm a leopard gecko content creator, right? So I look at who's above me, who's like close to me, who's around me, who's below me, right? Like I look at all these things and it's just fun to keep track of people's channels over the years. I followed WICKENS since he was 10,000 subscribers, and now he's well over, I think like 300 or something. And the content that he creates is long form content and gets a lot of views, and he does a ton of collaborations with other pet tubers. You know, I just started learning about this whole section, like Jessica's Animal Friends, Rebecca, WICKENS, even Snake Discovery to a certain degree. They're kind of teetering the line. Those are pet tubers. They're people that are more geared towards the pet audience and not the breeder audience, right? Where was I? Rebecca was, I forget, let's just get back to her.
Reptiles deserve so much more then some sand and dirt, some bricks you found in your garden, and some twigs you found on the side of the road. Like, I understand Adam's trying to appeal to a big group of people who want to get into reptiles, don't want to spend that much money.
That's what I was
get
talking
that,
about.
and I don't think he means anything bad by this. It's a good video idea, but this is a sad looking enclosure.
she finally breaks through all of her charitableness and like holding it together. She's like, this is just a sad enclosure. I'm sorry, Adam. I'm not like laughing at you or the enclosure, because again, I tend to be more liberal with like what I allow people to express as far as who they are and what they do with their animals, as long as it's not like, you know, I can't say the thing that just came to mind, but like hurting them and stuff like that, right? So
but whatever's outside in your yard, do you keep animals outside? I keep tortoises outside. If there was issues with what's going on, then you'd have issues with that too. So as long as there's no pet.
And that's a good point. I keep tegus outside. I keep reptiles outside, right? And so like the stuff that I gather from outside here locally, as long as there's no pesticides and stuff like he's talking about, to a certain degree, you could know that, okay, the reptiles in this location are okay with this environment, microbes, bacteria, so why should my captive ones not be? And that's what I was talking about earlier when I said captive reptiles, to a certain degree, if you're going to be putting wood and dirt and those kinds of things from the outside environment into your house or into your cage, or they're going to be going into the grass in your backyard sometimes, you want them to actually build up an immunity and a defense against the local bacteria, viruses, microbes that are currently in your environment.
Pesticides, as long as you're not spraying your yard, you're going to be okay. And then when I'm collecting sticks like you saw earlier, I collected these from a place that's natural. No one's spraying it. It's not near any fields, anything like that.
Okay, now here, Rebecca's about to bring up a point that I did not know.
One thing that's always freaked me out is snails being on stuff, and I'll tell you for why. Snails can carry lungworm. If you have dogs, you'll know this, because it's always like, don't let your dogs eat snails or anything like that. Or if snails have been on vegetation, make sure you clean it, because they carry a lot. So just like snails and slugs alone climbing on this stuff, I'm sure it happens to a lot of stuff we put in our enclosures, but that kind of freaks me out.
The idea is just have fun with it. Create a place for them to hide on the cool side, on the warm side. Create many spots if it's for many animals, and make sure that
I was going to say that's really good information, create many spots, but create many spots even for one animal. If it's...
Rebecca's just trying to hold it together. Poor Rebecca.
Even if it's a leopard gecko.
Okay, now Adam is about to make the defense for cohabitation under proper circumstances where the animals are getting along and they've been proven to get along in the past, which is what he just said right before this section.
All full size. They're all really great so far. I've had them together when I'm cleaning bins and things like that. And of course, there's no males. There's only females. There's gonna be no breeding. There's gonna be no fighting. There's lots of place for them to go. So let's go ahead.
So even if you're housing girls together, what you'll find is, unlike, say, guinea pigs or rabbits that bond and need to be together and are social animals and really need that strong bond, a lot of the time people will do this almost always to prove a point, and then like a few months or maybe years later you're like, oh, how are your geckos doing? They're like, nah, we had to split them up, they're fighting. Like, they pretty much tolerate each other until they don't. And as I said, unless you've got a big...
So she is kind of right about this. You know, in my experience with breeding leopard geckos, we do group breeding. I started off group breeding with 4 females to a tub, an appropriate size tub, right? And then that actually kind of worked, but I don't know. I just didn't like the fact that one male would have to responsibly breed 4 females. Like, what if he doesn't get to the other females? I still produced a lot of eggs, but the main reason I changed was it was efficient to do it that way, but the main reason I changed is I thought I would get better fertility with 3 females to a tub. And then 3 females to a tub was like a little bit too much. And I was still getting great fertility, like 100% fertility. And then I thought 2 females would be better. And now I kind of take the point that it's not necessarily about fertility. It's about what I like to feel comfortable with as far as how many animals are living in this environment. And also, there is a small section of, in my head, even though the male seemed to fertilize all 4 girls. Okay, hold on. Let me restart that. When you have 4 girls living in a cage, the male is going to have to be in there for a longer period of time, like a 1-week period of time. And that can cause for a lot of stress and turbulation between all those animals, because now you have 5 animals living in a space that was like meant for 4 animals, you know, or even less than that. And I just didn't like it, right? So I was like, for the sake of the animals, as well as the sake of what I think would be better fertility, let's move to 3. And then I didn't like 3, so I was like, let's move to 2. And now I like 2. 2 is good because the male does not get to pick on one female and only try to breed her overnight and, like, you know, try to breed her too much and really bother her or get in fights with her. But there's 2 females to kind of divert his time. And you don't have to keep the male in there as long. You could only keep him in there for 1 or 2 days max, and then you can pull him. Whereas if you have 3 to 4 girls, you're probably going to want to... When I had 3 girls to a tub, I was keeping the male in there for like 3 to 4 days, like 1 day per girl. And then when I had 4 girls in a tub, it was like 4 to 5 days, sometimes even 6 days the male was in there, just to make sure that he got a chance to breed with all of those females, didn't double breed a female and not breed one female, and then waste his energy, waste his sperm. So that's why I just really didn't like the 3 or 4 girls. I think it's a waste of the male's energy. It's a waste of the male's sperm. And you would be much more efficient at just putting him in with 2 girls for 1 to 2 days, giving him a rest, and then putting him in another tub with another 2 girls. Plus, the girls then have more space, less stress. Now, to touch on Rebecca's point real quick. Oh, she didn't bring up this point yet. So let her finish bringing up this point.
Tank or a big zoo-like enclosure where you can replicate what they do in the wild, and you're almost going to breed them because you need that dominant male and his harem.
There you go. She says if you are going to put a group of leopard geckos together, or she was kind of talking about like in the wild when they do find leopard geckos together. Number 1, the leopard geckos still have a chance to separate as much as they want. And then number 2, a male tends to be the dominant gecko in that territory. And if you don't have a male as a dominant gecko in that territory, the females will fight. I would kind of disagree with that from my observation, what I've seen here. In my observation, when I have had groups of girls that are not breeding, not ovulating, sometimes I've kept them in groups of 4 just for space and efficiency's sake in like a large tub while they're not breeding. And I don't do this anymore, but back when I did do this for about a period of a year, I noticed that there was way less fighting and way less like biting and nipping of each other when the girls were not in heat or when they were not breeding. When a girl goes into heat, when she goes into ovulation, she starts to get a little bit more territorial. And so I would actually say from my observation, I would say the opposite is more true, where if you are going to keep girls together, then you would want the girls to not be ovulating. And one girl that's ovulating can trigger another girl that's ovulating. So you might want to, like, I'm not saying you should cohab, but like if you were, you might want to pick geckos that are currently not ovulating. That way, when they're first introduced to being with each other, they get used to each other. Then when they go on their cycles, they're already used to being around each other, and they'll be a little bit more understanding and less defensive of each other. But even then, their attitudes can change. And I've seen that happen where 2 geckos will be living together, no problem, no issues. And then out of nowhere, one gecko will just take up a dominance and an aggressive stance towards another female leopard gecko. And that's what she's going to mention here.
This is no benefit to these geckos at all.
Keep in mind, these geckos are all the same size, they're the same age, they're the same sex, which is really important. Females only, never put 2 males.
So it really doesn't matter if they're the same size. What you're going to find when you do...
Oh, and I should mention, talking about the harem thing, if you put a male with a bunch of females, the male is constantly going to be trying to breed those females. Constantly. And that's going to send the females into ovulation. So that's what I mean by it would be better just to have just females and not a harem type scenario, because the just females will not fight as much as the harem group would. There was something she said back here. I think I missed it. I want to touch on it real quick.
There's a word I like to use to describe these people. Wrong and close-minded. It's just not the case.
She was watching this video live, so she was being charitable to him, and then he was like, there's this word for these people that say that you can't cohab. Wrong. And she's like, oh, you could hear her kind of charitable laugh. I can really appreciate how Rebecca can laugh at herself and know her own biases, right? Because we all have biases towards what we like and what we don't like. And she just kind of understands. She's like, yeah, I know my bias. I know that I'm the upper echelons promoter of, you know, standard for how reptiles should be kept. And I know that, you know, other people and other standards might be down here. But so she kind of had a good laugh at her upper echelon standard there, which is pretty cool.
Okay. Once again, people will do this to prove a point.
Okay, so that's the thing that I wanted to mention earlier that I forgot to bring up is she said this twice now. People will do things that like what Adam's doing to prove a point. And I totally understand that because that has gotten me in trouble more times than I can count in the past because, you know, sometimes there's overcorrection in the hobby. Right. And so let's take, for example, one thing that happened with me, like holding a leopard gecko by the tail. I even have videos of how to show people that you can hold leopard geckos by the tail safely. The reason that I'm so willing to show those videos and teach people how to do that is because I am 100% confident that if you do it correctly and properly, that it will be fine for the gecko. And I also want to prove a point, like Rebecca's saying, that there are people that are trying to overcorrect on the internet, where if you go onto like a leopard gecko forum, there are some groups that scare people from even looking at a leopard gecko's tail because it's going to pop off. And so they're so standoffish, like, oh no, my gecko's tail is going to pop off. And then they see me holding the gecko by the tail and they're like completely in shock. They're like, what is going on here? Why is the gecko not dropping its tail? And most of them have a genuine curiosity, like, hey, aren't you not supposed to hold the gecko by the tail? And then I'll explain to them. But there are other people that take the approach where they want you to listen to them, so they will purposely exaggerate or overcorrect the truth and they'll say something like, oh, if you touch a leopard gecko by the tail, it's going to drop it. So don't touch a leopard gecko by the tail. And then that's left people wondering, like, what's the truth here? I see Frank holding a gecko by the tail. I see this person telling me I can't even look at a leopard gecko's tail. The truth is often somewhere in between, right? Or a combination. And so that's my overcorrection of like holding geckos by the tail on camera and like showing that to people is sort of to prove a point against the people that are overcorrecting that you can't do that. Now I wouldn't say that that's my motive in every scenario, but that's definitely been my motive at times in the past. And I'll admit this, it's a fault of mine sometimes in the past when I'm having like a live stream or a video and somebody's like, don't touch them by the tail, don't hold them by the tail. And I will just, you know, kindly show them, hey, look, you can hold a gecko by the tail, let it do a little handstand and it's okay. Even though I say it and do it in a nice way, I guess a part of me, the motivation for doing that is like to prove a point. And maybe I don't need to do that. Maybe I can just like verbally or audibly say like, hey, look, we got some videos on this topic if you want to, but while this is a live stream, I don't want to provoke myself into somebody else that is provoking me to like overcorrect the scenario kind of thing. So I don't know. I'm still thinking that through. I tend to be very like overly confident with the things that I show and express. Just imagine this for a second. Imagine that I say, hey, you can hold a leopard gecko by the tail, and I pick it up, hold it by the tail, and it drops its tail live on camera. How bad would that make me look, right? So when I hold a leopard gecko by the tail, I am so confident that that will not happen that I'm willing to hold it by the tail on a live video. So that should say something in of itself, but that does not give me an excuse to overcorrect and like do it just to prove a point, so to speak. Like, you know what I mean? So I need to be a little more charitable and careful with like how I come across and how hastily and how quickly I am to correct people and show people that correction on camera, because I also don't want to be misinterpreted and then somebody at home just grabs their gecko by the tail and then it pops off kind of thing, right? Because there is nuance in a lot of practices.
And the only things that suffer are the animals.
Not true. And of course, it's up to you. Do you think 4 or 6 or 8 is the right amount for this enclosure?
So the fact that Adam said, do you think 4 or 6 or 8 is the right amount, kind of shows that he's like pushing the boundaries a little bit of just because I can, I will type mentality, right? Or like what she was saying, just because I can prove it, I'm going to prove it. Like, you know, he could have made this cage just for 4. And if he made this cage just for 4, I think that would have been a lot better from Rebecca's perspective. But 6 is a very high number. And then 8 is an extremely high number. When you start to hear about like 8 creatures that are more territorial living together of a species, it just kind of sends the wrong message to people. And so, like I said, this was, to me, this was very uncharacteristic of Adam, but maybe now that I think about it, I've started to see him push back a little bit, similar to me. I think he's struggling with the same thing that I'm struggling with as a content creator. There's a balance between what you know you can do and get away with as far as like keeping the animals, and then the way that people prefer to see the animals living. And sometimes there's an overcorrection by us in this category that are like, no, that's absolutely not true. You could grab a gecko by the tail. No, that's absolutely not true. You can cohab geckos. There's like an overcorrection on our end to prove it to people, and we kind of go off the deep end a little bit and go a little too far past what is comfortable. Plus, to be honest, most YouTubers can only make a living by being sensational. So being sensational means like showing animals like eating their food, lunging at you, talking about controversial topics like this that's going to get a rise out of people. Now, the animal world is a little bit different than the political world. The animal world is a small world, and if you start making controversial content, that can definitely cause issues for you as far as like the cohesiveness of that small world. And so that is something to think about. It's definitely something to consider. And I did always view Adam as more of a pet tuber, more of the person that is careful with what he says, careful with what he shows. But I have seen a couple of his videos where he does go off the deep end and kind of talk like a breeder talks. Like, oh yeah, you could hold this gecko by the tail. Oh yeah, you could cohab 8 geckos together, right? So like, and mind you, he did not say that you can cohab 8 geckos, but he did sow the thought in somebody's mind that, hey, I can, if he tried 6, maybe I can try 8, right? Like he sowed that thought. And was that on purpose? Was it by accident? Was it to generate views? Was it to get reactions like this? I don't know, but I never took Adam as a reactionary, sensational content creator. There is a different side of content creation that can get views in the animal world, and it is the pet tuber content creator, which is more like what Jessica's Animals Friends does, and Rebecca. They kind of show the best of the best side of keeping, and elaborate setups, bioactive setups, natural setups, beautiful setups. Herp Time also does this really well, and these channels are extremely successful without being sensational, without baiting the animals into weird behaviors or weird actions or anything like that, like a lot of other YouTube animal creators will do. They're very accomplishable. Yes, I think I made that word up. By just showing the best that they can do for these animals and the best that we can provide. And it looks like a jungle or a mini naturalistic habitat in somebody's home. And that is a trend that is becoming very popular on YouTube.
Personally, I think about 20 gallons per, especially when you're giving them room to climb around, just because.
Okay, so he said to give your geckos 20 gallons per, especially when you're giving your geckos room to climb around. Now, what I would say in response to that is, again, with this cage particularly, leopard geckos are, most people don't build leopard gecko cages super tall because they don't think about the gecko using that space. Now, I will say the gecko would absolutely use whatever space you give it. If you give it branches, that that take up the volume of the cage. But if you look at this cage, so like, let's look real quick at his setup. Oh, whoops. Okay, let's let that play.
Tail wagging welcomes, wet nose kisses,
Oh, kitties,
cuddles,
puppies.
snuggles, and
Anything like that.
Let's
One
look
thing
at
that's always freaked me out.
No talking points.
Okay,
They
boom. So in reality, this is a 4x2x2 cage, but in reality, only half of the volume is being used. Actually, less, because these little twigs do not count as like flat surface volume width-wise. It's just like a small like ledge that the gecko can stand on. If you wanted to truly make this cage the most functional, you would have to put levels to it, like levels of like plywood or PVC that were going across, where the gecko can climb from the bottom level to the mid level to the second mid level to the top level, and then sticks all in between, and places for the animals to hide on all those different levels. That would be a true representation of volume and space that the animals would have to use. So when he says over here to give them 20 gallons per, I think that statement was just a little bit maybe underthought as far as what is actually being accomplished in this particular scenario with the volume that's not being used and the twigs that are not really giving that much more extra volume or extra space for the animals to move around. Now, I will say this is actually, despite what Rebecca critiqued about it being a few twigs and bricks, I actually kind of like this setup, and I think it's pretty cool. I would just like, if it was, if there was no options and time, money, resources were not limited, I would actually make more volume to this. So maybe a vast array of sticks that actually go all the way to the top and all the way to the sides, or a multi-level, multi-layer, flat platform type thing. And I'm not asking Adam to do that. That was not the purpose of him making this video. I am just commenting on what he said about 20 gallons per animal. So a 20-gallon tank has a foot layout of about 2 feet by 1 feet, right? This is a 4x2 tank. So that means that this 4x2 tank can house about 4 20-gallon tanks. But he has 6 leopard geckos. You know, the space that he's using with the twigs and the bricks and all that is about equivalent to 4 20-gallon tanks, but he has 6 leopard geckos in there. So in reality, the other half of this 4x2 enclosure is not being utilized. And so there is not more than 4 20-gallon tanks space that the geckos can use, if that makes sense, in this 4x2 cage. If he were to utilize the second half of the volume and make more twigs, I almost said twigs again, twigs and sticks and levels to this cage, then absolutely he would be using the full volume of the potential of this cage. But because that was not done, I don't think it's that accurate of a representation to say that, oh, because this is a 4x2x2 cage, even though I'm not using all the volume, it matches 6 20-gallon tanks in equivalency. And I think that he would see the legitimacy in that. He might push back on that and say, well, I have twigs and sticks in there that take up more space. But again, those twigs and sticks don't actually give that much space to make up the difference of gallons per gecko that he was just kind of talking about. And also, to his defense, most people that do have a leopard gecko in a 20-gallon tank don't use the full volume of a 20-gallon tank either. So we could argue that the amount of floor space and volume that is actually used in a 20-gallon tank is equivalent to house these 6 geckos in this 4x2. But anyway, Rebecca wasn't having that either way, so...
There's a word I like to use to describe these people. Wrong and closed-minded. It's just not the case.
Okay.
I like that part.
So let's be open-minded, not screaming at each other in the comments, and let's just really enjoy these geckos.
Let's be open-minded. I mean, as a breeder, we love that saying, right? Because the way that breeders do things oftentimes does not look very flattering to the average keeper, right? It's not to say that the animals are neglected or abused, but they are offered less enrichment than a keeper or a pet keeper would be keeping in. But most pet keepers understand that, hey, a breeding operation has a different goal. Now, as a breeding operation, you need to, or you should be, prioritizing hygiene, health of the animals, quality of the animals. You should be prioritizing all of that, because if you're sending out sick and unhealthy animals, that's just not going to get you recurring customers. It's not going to get you word of mouth. It's not going to get you good reviews. So it does you no good as a breeder to be sending out unhealthy, sick animals. But the argument comes into play is the animals that are breeding and living in a breeding operation, are they offered as much enrichment as they can be? And that's the difficult situation, because again, these animals don't go for $1 million. This leopard gecko right here, he probably paid like $50 for that. And for the breeder of a leopard gecko that's only worth $50, for a breeder to house that gecko, pay for its food, raise it to a certain age where it's sellable, pay for employees to take care of that, it could almost be no profit or minus profit if we were to go into a situation where breeders have to do everything in the sense of like pet approval, right? Like cages, UVB, heat sources that are diverse, and texture and all that kind of stuff. Like, this would be impossible to breed geckos in, because you would not be able to pull the eggs. You would not be able to efficiently make sure that the males are seeing the females and breeding the females. So this is not, a tank like this is not an efficient breeder setup for those reasons, and probably more if I was to think about it. So the question is, what do we do with the mid-tier to low tier of breeders as far as the standards are concerned? Do we push? Are we willing to pay more for our animals? This is a very difficult situation. Do we just not show tubs and stuff like that because they're not flattering? I really don't know what the answer is right now, but this much I can tell you is everybody has a camera and an opinion nowadays, and everybody is using that camera and using that opinion to share their thoughts, similar to what I'm doing right now, right? And so breeders have to be way more cautious about what they're putting out. And I think that that will ultimately also, I was going to say that that would help the image of reptiles, but it would also hurt the knowledge of keepers when they're trying to learn, like, okay, how do I set up a tub? How do I set up a rack? How do I build a rack if those videos are not out there? So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and comments below, and maybe even react to this video. I've wanted to team up with Adam for a long time, and Rebecca for a long time. And even Jessica again. You know, not to say that these guys would ever give me the time of day, but if they were to see this and if they were to hear this, I would love to maybe do a collaboration live stream with them, talking about how do we blend these worlds together, right? Because I feel like Adam is somewhere between where I am as a breeder, where he is as like kind of a pet keeper, tuber slash breeder, and then where Jessica's animal friends, who's a rescue slash rehab, as well as Rebecca from the channel Leopard Gecko that we are watching right now. By the way, if you couldn't see it, her channel is Leopard Gecko, very good channel. We're kind of all over the place in that spectrum of keeping and morals and ethics. So I think it would make a pretty awesome episode for us to team up together and see what we come up with. So if you like this reactionary type video, let me know. This is something I've been wanting to do for a long time, but I wanted to do it in a family-friendly, charitable, sensitive way. So if you leave a comment like, hey Frank, I want to see you like go toe to toe on these topics in like a boxing ring type scenario, right? Where you're like condemning the other person, or like accusing or like belittling the other person. I really doubt that I will ever do those types of reactionary videos, because I just don't feel like that is on brand with my heart, on brand with my view for what I would like to promote and pursue. But reaction videos like this, that tend to be a little bit more on the charitable side and just reactionary side, but not necessarily like condemning anyone or calling anyone out in a negative way. I'm all about that. And so if you like that, let me know, and I'd be happy to do more of these videos. So thank you guys so much. I will see you in the next video. And until then, you know what we say. Have yourselves a geeky gecko. Great day. Peace.